Hey, this is McGarren Flack. Just going to go over constructing this beautiful camera. It's a Sony ZV-1. See, right there. Before I get into the construction of it, reference is very important. Make sure that you have very good reference shots of your object that you're going to be sculpting. I'd recommend using a geometric shape instead of an organic shape. So organic shape would be like a face or an animal. Geometric is just going to be a lot easier to be able to handle and understand how to simplify the shapes because most of them have already simplified. These top three images, I have a top-down view, a front view, and a side view. Those three views will give me a lot of information to be able to successfully do this. If I want to be more successful and not have any excuses to not do a good job, I would get a top-down three-quarter view, top-down front view, front and back of the three-quarter, just kind of like these three images. This will give you a lot more angle to be able to observe what is going on with the shapes and how to sculpt them. So just having three is good, but it's going to be better if you have a lot more views. So make sure that you have access to your object to be able to sculpt from. If you can bring it to class, I would highly recommend doing that. If you are unable to bring it to class, just make sure that you bring the reference shots for your object that you're going to sculpt. To start constructing, I should say to deconstruct this, we need to figure out what is the most simple shape to be able to sculpt with. I would highly recommend squinting down. When you squint down, you're able to simplify shapes. A lot of these little details that are here in the front for the lens for it to open up are all fancy looking and it looks great, but that's not important. The little dots, not important. Lens icon over here is not important. The Sony, not important. So when you squint down, yes, you can still kind of see these things, but it really takes away a lot of the details that are important to the overall shape of the object. So we're looking for primary shapes. And the first primary shape that I see, if I were to just use one, is cuboid. So it's kind of like a rectangle that's extruded, and it's not as deep as it is tall, and it's not as deep as it is wide. So it is a cuboid type shape, kind of like this. So here, I would just take this cube, simplify it, and sculpt a cube shape. Now, the other shapes that I see when I'm squinting down that are relatively large is a cylinder here in the front for the lens and a cylinder here on the side for the hand grip. All these other little ones, they stick out just a little bit, but they're not very, very important. So three simple big shapes. We have the cuboid, and then we have the cylinders. If you look at the cylinders, this protrudes out. If we look at the top-down view, the lens does not come out as far as the body of the camera. Take that into consideration. Also, the cylinder from the top-down view, it's just past the halfway mark of the cylinder. This is not fully seen. It's embedded into the cuboid. After I have my two cylinders, I also want to make sure that the cylinder height here and the height down here is the same as the height of the cuboid. The cylinder for the hand grip is not as high as the cuboid. It kind of stops at a certain point, so about 3/4 of the way up. That's very important to be able to notice and understand. The distance between this cylinder and the lens is about equal. So if we take two of these cylinders and shift them over to the side, it's about the same distance. Also another cylinder distance over here. So that will help you understand how wide you make this cylinder versus how tall you make the cylinder. Same thing with this. This is going to be a circle, so it's not oblong, it's a circle. So it's going to be the same height as the Sony body. Now that we have all of this figured out on the two cylinders and the cuboid, if we put them together, it would look like this. We will take the clay, sculpt out these individual shapes, then combine them through slipping and scoring and slipping, put them together. After they are put together, then you look for the secondary shapes. And the secondary shapes are here in red. So if I take away the cuboid, you can see there is a notch that comes out on the back side. So I'd have that huge rectangle that would come out, and then I would just take out this notch that goes towards the back, and then I would add this little portion for the thumb that goes on there and this other little portion at the front of the camera. So those would be my secondary shapes that I would do, but I would only do those after I put all the primary shapes together. If I have the primary and secondary shapes all refined, everything looks good, it's all proportionate, it looks right, then I will go in and start to do the tertiary shapes, which are the little buttons that are at the top here and the little cylinder that's sitting there and these little notches that are coming out where you can put your flash head and stuff like that. So I also have here in the red, forgot about this little part. This I would consider to be a secondary shape. It's kind of like a circle that is flattened at the top and the bottom, and it indents just a little bit. I would sculpt that out and then start to work on the ellipses. You do not have to worry about putting in the font or the numbers or anything like that. Those are not important. You should be able to know what the shape or object is without any of the fonts, just because you sculpted the shape so freaking well. It's very important. Just as a summary, you got to find the primary shapes, cuboid and two cylinders. Make sure they're proportionate to each other. Second step, you combine all of those shapes. Put the cylinders on the cuboid. Third step, remove the secondary shapes or add the secondary shapes. So this little part is going to be removed. We're going to add this little thumb part and this for the index finger to be able to zoom in and out. Beyond that, you would then sculpt the tertiary shapes. The goal is you want to make it look so close, if not perfectly, like the object that you are using as your reference. I will now demonstrate how I go about sculpting the primary and secondary shapes. Here I have Cone 5 clay. I think it's B mix. And also I have a spray bottle from the university just for use here. And I have a palette knife that I'm using because I forgot all my sculpting tools. But all I'm doing is I'm going to start off by making the cuboid shape or the body of the camera. And I just cut the piece off. You don't have to really knead it. This is clay that was right out of the bag, so there shouldn't be any air bubbles. But using the palette knife to be able to cut and flatten out some of those shapes because I want to try to make it as flat as possible, and it was sticking a little bit here and there, so I try to make the best of it. But now that I have that simple shape done, I'm going to make the shallow cylinder or the lens that will go on the camera. And there's an easier way of doing this. You could take the top of a mason jar bottle and make your cylinder just by pressing it in the clay, or you could hand build it like I'm doing right now. And I was just measuring the top and the bottom and then cutting that cylinder shape out so that it fits the top and the bottom of the camera, just like I was talking about earlier in the video, where you have to make sure that your proportions are correct. So the thickness, it's just a little bit thicker than I wanted, so I'm shaving some of that down and I'm making it flat and making sure that it fits. Now I'm making the tall cylinder, the handle, and I'm just rolling it to make it cylindrical. But I noticed that it was a little bit too big, so I rolled it a little bit more, and now I'm checking the height and the width, and I like it. So now I'm cutting out a 90-degree angle on that and tearing it out so that I can add it to my cuboid. So after I've gone through, I've refined these a little bit more, make sure that everything fits correctly, and then after it does, I do a slip and score. This is just where you scratch the surface of the clay, and then you take some of the spray bottle, spray it on there, mix them together, and compress them. You want to sculpt around the edges. This will allow the clay to stick to itself. Slip and score, also the little handle, the two sides that I'm combining there, and then compressing them and rounding off the shape. That's basically it for the slipping and scoring. Pretty simple to be able to do. Now I'm going to go in and refine each of those shapes a little bit more, these primary shapes. So that cylinder came out just a little bit too much, so I want to flatten it a little bit more. I also wanted to make the cylinder more cylindrical by hand sculpting it. If the clay ever gets too dry, then just take some of that spray bottle and spray it. But if you make it too wet, I find that it's pretty hard to handle. So at this stage, because the clay is semi-wet, and here I'm just adding little parts into that back part of the clay and trying to flatten it out so that it doesn't have too much of a texture. Using the palette knife to do that, it will flatten out all of the shapes just a little bit, but I want to wait until it gets leather hard to be able to do any details, because right now it's a little bit flimsy. I could accidentally drop it on something and it would just squish. So after you have the primary shapes, you want to work on the secondary shape. So here I'm cutting out that little lip that was on the camera on the back side of it. I'm making the little thumb handle right now, which is basically a triangle, very simple shape. And then I'm going to slip and score that triangle with the back side of the handle. Make sure that I have it in the right place. And there we have it. Just soften out those edges so that it doesn't pop out too much, because it's a very subtle little thumbprint that's in there. Okay, now I'm going to go around and refine that handle. It stuck out just a little bit too much for my liking, so I'm just cutting off parts of it so it's a little bit more flush with the side of the camera so it doesn't stick out too far, and it looks more like the actual reference. I'm going to take some of the flatter areas of the camera, flatten them out even more. I don't want to have little dents or grooves in there. I'm going to try to simplify it as much as I can and cut the edges. So I'm what I call killing the corner. I don't want to have a sharp edge. The camera doesn't have any sharp edges on it because you hold it in your hand and you want to have smooth edges. So that's what I'm doing with this, is just making those edges more round and soft, and just trying to get everything lined up. I'm using water to spray it, so that allows me to move the water-based clay just a little bit more, kind of kill the edges so that I don't have anything that is a hard edge. It's all softened and round-ish, kind of like the actual camera itself. So on the back there, I just had to fill in a little bit more because I would rather a little bit bulge out so I can smooth it down than have divots. If you have divots, it's harder to fill them in once it's gotten leather hard. At least that's been my experience. Now that we're done with the primary and secondary shapes, let it get leather hard. So you just take that camera, you spray it with some of the water around the whole entire thing, and then you take some plastic and put the plastic over your sculpture and cover it and leave it for a couple of days. If you spray it too much, it will get really soggy and it'll almost melt. So you don't really want to have that happen with your clay, but you want it to get leather hard so that you can start to get more detail information in your sculpture. I hope this was beneficial, and good luck on your project.